Welcome. Sit back and enjoy the Office Revenge Hub story.
My former co-workers tried to destroy my career, sabotage my reputation, and make sure I'd never work in our industry again. They almost succeeded. But what they didn't count on was that sometimes the person you try to bury is actually a seed, not a corpse. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and for 7 years I worked as a senior account executive at Pinnacle Marketing Group in Chicago. When I started there fresh out of college, Pinnacle was a scrappy mid-sized agency with about 40 employees, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's coffee orders and we'd celebrate wins with champagne in the conference room. I was employee number 43, hired to support the account team and learn the business from the ground up. I loved that job from day one. Marketing wasn't just what I did, it was who I was. And I had this instinct for understanding what made brands connect with people, what turned casual consumers into loyal advocates. My first year, I worked on whatever accounts needed support, doing research, preparing decks, sitting in on client calls, mostly listening and learning, but I paid attention to everything: how senior people pitched, how they handled difficult clients, what strategies worked and which ones fell flat. By year 2, I was managing smaller accounts on my own. By year 3, I was bringing in new business through networking and referrals. By year 5, I was one of the top revenue generators at the agency, personally responsible for about 18% of our annual billings. I worked constantly, early mornings, late nights, weekends when pitches were due. I missed family events, cancelled dates, postponed vacations, and I told myself it was temporary, that I was building something, that the sacrifice would pay off. The culture at Pinnacle was competitive but supposedly fair. Our founder and CEO, Patricia Harding, talked constantly about meritocracy, about rewarding results over politics. She had this saying she'd repeat in company meetings: "Performance speaks louder than promises." I believed her. I watched people get promoted based on their numbers, saw bonuses distributed according to revenue contribution. It seemed like if you did excellent work, you'd be recognized and compensated appropriately. I had a core group of colleagues I worked closely with. There was Amanda Chen, another senior account executive who joined about a year after me, Jason Brooks, who led our creative team, and Ryan Caldwell, who handled our largest retail accounts and had been at Pinnacle for 9 years, longer than almost anyone except Patricia herself. We collaborated on pitches, covered for each other when someone was overwhelmed, celebrated each other's wins, or at least I thought we did. The dynamics started shifting about 3 years ago when Patricia announced she was planning to eventually transition into a chairman role and would be promoting someone to president to handle day-to-day operations. She didn't say when this would happen or who she was considering, just that she was thinking about succession planning as she approached 60. That casual mention changed everything. Suddenly the competitive energy at Pinnacle got sharper, more intense. People started positioning themselves more aggressively in meetings, taking credit more explicitly, undermining each other in subtle ways. I noticed it but tried to stay above it. I figured the best strategy was just to keep doing excellent work, keep growing my accounts, keep delivering results. Numbers don't lie, right? I was managing a major account for a national fitness brand called Vital Core. I'd brought them in 2 years earlier, started with a modest campaign budget of about $200,000 annually, and had grown it to over $1 million by understanding their brand evolution and helping them connect with a younger demographic. The Vital Core CMO, a woman named Lauren Diaz, trusted me completely. We'd developed a real partnership where I wasn't just executing campaigns but helping shape their broader marketing strategy. Vital Core was preparing to launch a new product line, that premium home fitness equipment aimed at affluent millennials. Lauren wanted to do something innovative for the launch, not just traditional advertising, but an integrated brand experience that would generate organic buzz and position VitalCore as a lifestyle brand, not just an equipment manufacturer. She gave me 6 weeks to develop a comprehensive proposal. I threw everything into that pitch. I conducted consumer research, analyzed competitor positioning, developed a multi-channel strategy that combined influencer partnerships, experiential pop-ups, content marketing, and strategic PR. I created a detailed budget, timeline, and measurement framework. It was the best work I'd ever done. A campaign that could genuinely transform how VitalCore was perceived in the market. Now, the pitch was scheduled for a Thursday morning at VitalCore's headquarters. Patricia wanted to attend since it was such a significant potential expansion of the account. The day before the pitch, I was doing final rehearsals when Ryan stopped by my office. He asked how prep was going, seemed genuinely interested in the strategy. I walked him through the key elements, even showed him some of the deck since we'd collaborated on other pitches before. He offered some thoughtful feedback, suggested a few minor tweaks to the budget breakdown. I appreciated it, made the adjustments he recommended. The morning of the pitch, I arrived at VitalCore's office with Patricia. We were setting up in their main conference room when my laptop froze. Completely unresponsive, blue screen of death. I tried restarting it multiple times, nothing worked. While Lauren and her team were gathering, we were minutes from starting, and I had no access to my presentation. I called back to the Pinnacle office in a panic, asked Amanda if she could grab my backup files from our server and email them. She said she'd handle it immediately. 15 increasingly awkward minutes passed while I made small talk with VitalCore's team, explaining there was a technical issue. Patricia looked increasingly annoyed. Finally, my phone buzzed with an email from Amanda. I opened it on my phone, planning to present from there if necessary, and my stomach dropped. The attachment was a presentation, but it wasn't mine. It was a generic template deck with placeholder text. Completely unusable. I called Amanda back, asked what happened. She sounded confused, said that was the only VitalCore file she could find on the server. I knew that was impossible. I'd saved multiple versions with clear labeling. I had no choice but to apologize to Lauren, explain that we'd experienced a technical failure, and ask to reschedule. Lauren was gracious but clearly disappointed. Patricia was silent the entire drive back to the office, which was somehow worse than if she'd yelled. Back at Pinnacle, I went straight to my desk and checked our server. My presentation files were gone, not just the latest version, all of them, like they'd never existed. I checked my email archives, my local backup drive, everywhere I might have saved a copy. Nothing. 7 weeks of work had vanished. I reported it to our IT manager, a guy named Carl who'd been with the company forever. He looked into it and came back with information that made no sense. According to the server logs, I had deleted those files myself at 11:47 the previous night. I told him that was impossible. I'd been home asleep at that time. He showed me the logs. The deletion had been executed from my user account, from my computer, while I was logged in. I sat there staring at those logs, feeling sick. Someone had accessed my account and deliberately sabotaged me. But who would do that? And how had they gotten my login credentials? I went to Patricia's office to explain what had happened. I told her about the deleted files, the suspicious server logs, my belief that someone had intentionally sabotaged the pitch. I expected her to be concerned, to launch an investigation, to recognize that something deeply wrong had occurred. Instead, she looked at me with this expression of disappointment mixed with skepticism. She said technical issues happen, that it was my responsibility to have multiple backups, that the problem wasn't the deleted files, but my failure to prepare adequately for such an important presentation. She said she'd have to call Lauren personally to apologize, that this kind of unprofessionalism reflected badly on the entire agency. When I tried to insist that this was sabotage, not negligence, Patricia cut me off. She said making accusations about colleagues without evidence was inappropriate and that I should focus on recovering the client relationship rather than deflecting blame. I left her office feeling like I'd been punched. The person who'd sabotaged me was being protected while I was being blamed for not preventing their sabotage. Over the next few days, I tried to rebuild the Vital Core presentation from memory and fragments I'd sent to Lauren in earlier emails. I worked around the clock, barely sleeping, trying to recreate what I'd lost. I reached out to Lauren to reschedule, apologizing profusely for the technical failure. She was polite but non-committal, said they were evaluating options and would be in touch. Then things got worse. I started hearing whispers around the office, rumors that I'd been unprepared for the Vital Core pitch, that I'd panicked under pressure, that maybe I wasn't ready to handle accounts of that scale. I couldn't figure out where these rumors were coming from until I overheard Amanda and Jason talking in the break room. Amanda was saying she'd tried to help me with the technical issues, but that I'd seemed disorganized and flustered. Which Jason mentioned he'd heard I'd been struggling with the complexity of the Vital Core strategy. These were outright lies. Amanda had sent me the wrong file, whether deliberately or through her own incompetence. Jason hadn't been involved in the Vital Core pitch at all. But they were shaping a narrative that made my failure seem like a personal shortcoming rather than sabotage. I confronted Amanda privately, asked her directly why she'd sent me the wrong file. She looked at me with this perfectly practiced expression of concern and said she'd sent exactly what I'd asked for, that maybe in my stressed state, I'd mislabeled files or given her the wrong file name. She suggested gently that I seemed to be under a lot of pressure, that maybe I should consider taking some time off to regroup. And that's when I realized this wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This was coordinated. Someone, maybe multiple people, had deliberately sabotaged me and were now controlling the narrative to make me look incompetent. 2 weeks after the failed Vital Core pitch, I got an email from Lauren. Vital Core had decided to work with a different agency for their product launch. She thanked me for my efforts over the years, but said they felt they needed a partner who could execute at the level this launch required. I'd lost the account. More than that, I'd lost $1 million client because of sabotage I couldn't prove. Patricia called me into her office the day after Vital Core terminated their contract. She was direct and cold. She said losing an account of that size was unacceptable, that it raised serious questions about my account management capabilities. She was putting me on a performance improvement plan. 60 days to demonstrate significant improvement in organization, preparation, and client retention. If I didn't meet the benchmarks, my position would be terminated. I sat there in shock. I'd been one of the top performers at this agency for years. I'd brought in more new business than almost anyone, and now I was being put on a PIP because someone had sabotaged me and I couldn't prove it. The performance improvement plan was humiliating. I had to submit weekly reports, documenting every client interaction, every project milestone, every deliverable. Ryan, of all people, was assigned to monitor my progress and provide coaching. The same Ryan who'd been so interested in my Vital Core strategy the day before my pitch failed. I started to suspect Ryan was behind the sabotage. He'd had access to the details of my pitch, had encouraged me to make specific changes to the proposal. What if those changes had been designed to weaken the strategy? What if he'd used our conversation to gather information he then used against me? But I had no proof, just suspicion and circumstantial evidence. My other accounts started experiencing problems. Small things at first, a creative brief that went to the wrong team member, delaying a project. A budget spreadsheet with formulas that had been altered, causing numbers to be incorrect when I presented them to a client. a conference call that I was somehow not included on, even though I was the account lead, to creating confusion and making me look disorganized. Each incident was minor enough to be explainable as a mistake or miscommunication, but collectively they created a pattern that made me look unreliable and incompetent. And each time something went wrong, Amanda or Jason or Ryan would be there to express concern, to offer help, to subtly reinforce the narrative that I was struggling. I tried to fight back. I documented every suspicious incident, took screenshots of altered files, saved emails that showed discrepancies. I tried to present this evidence to Patricia to make the case that I was being systematically undermined. She listened with visible impatience and then told me that my focus on blaming others for my performance issues was exactly the problem. She said high performers take responsibility rather than making excuses. Yeah, that my paranoia about colleagues was concerning and unprofessional. I felt like I was losing my mind. How could I prove sabotage when the saboteurs were careful enough not to leave obvious evidence? How could I defend myself when every defense was framed as deflection and every problem was attributed to my incompetence? The worst part was watching my colleagues turn against me. People I'd worked with for years, people I'd considered friends, started treating me differently. Some were awkwardly sympathetic, others openly dismissive. A few seemed to take satisfaction in my fall from grace. The office social dynamics shifted, and I found myself increasingly isolated. My performance review at the 60-day mark of my PIP was devastating. Patricia listed multiple incidents of poor performance, disorganization, and client dissatisfaction. Most of them were the result of the sabotage I couldn't prove, but a few were legitimate mistakes I'd made under the enormous stress of knowing I was being targeted. She said I hadn't demonstrated sufficient improvement and that Pinnacle was terminating my employment effective immediately. I was fired. 7 years of dedication, of sacrificing my personal life, of generating millions in revenue for the agency, and I was escorted out of the building with a box of my personal belongings like I'd committed some crime. The severance package was minimal, 2 weeks' pay. The non-compete clause in my employment contract prevented me from working for any competing agency or soliciting Pinnacle clients for 18 months. I was effectively locked out of the industry I'd devoted my entire adult life to, with no income, no prospects, gained a reputation that had been systematically destroyed. I went home that Friday afternoon and spent the entire weekend in a fog of shock and grief. I'd defined myself by my career, by my success at Pinnacle. Without that identity, I didn't know who I was. I felt worthless, humiliated, betrayed by people I'd trusted. Monday morning, I forced myself to start looking for jobs. I updated my resume, reached out to my network, applied to positions at other agencies. The responses were discouraging. Some people were sympathetic, but said they couldn't hire me because of the non-compete. Others had clearly heard rumors about my departure from Pinnacle, and their interest evaporated once they did some informal reference checking. I learned through a former colleague that Amanda had been telling people I'd been fired for performance issues, meant that I'd become unreliable and lost a major client through poor preparation. Ryan was apparently saying I'd struggled to handle complex accounts and had blamed others when things went wrong. The narrative they'd constructed was following me, poisoning opportunities before I could even interview. My savings started running out. I was behind on rent, cutting back on everything, selling possessions to cover basic expenses. I felt the walls closing in financially and emotionally. I'd gone from being a successful professional to barely surviving in a matter of weeks. About 3 months after being fired, I hit bottom. I was sitting in my apartment, which I'd probably have to leave in another month when my lease ended and I couldn't afford to renew. Scrolling through job listings I was either unqualified for or prevented from taking by my non-compete. I felt completely defeated, like my former co-workers had succeeded in destroying me. Then I got angry, really deeply angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of anger, but cold and clarifying. These people had deliberately sabotaged me, lied about me, ruined my career and reputation, and they'd done it because I was good at my job, because I was a threat to their own advancement. They'd won by being ruthless and dishonest, while I'd tried to play fair. I realized I'd been approaching this all wrong. I'd been trying to defend myself, to prove my innocence, to restore my reputation within the existing system. But that system was rigged against me. Patricia had chosen to believe the saboteurs over me. The industry grapevine had accepted their narrative. Fighting within that framework was pointless. I needed to build something new, something they couldn't touch or control or sabotage, something that would demonstrate my actual capabilities to people who didn't know the false narrative. I started researching what it would take to start my own marketing consultancy. Not a full agency competing with Pinnacle, that would violate my non-compete, but an independent consultant working with businesses that didn't overlap with Pinnacle's client base, maybe in different industries or markets. The non-compete prevented me from soliciting Pinnacle's clients, but it didn't prevent me from working in marketing entirely. I looked at my finances realistically. I had maybe 2 months of runway before I'd be completely broke. I needed to generate income fast, which meant I couldn't be picky about projects or wait for perfect opportunities. I needed to hustle. I started by reaching out to my network outside the traditional marketing agency world. Former classmates who'd gone into different industries, family connections, people I'd met at conferences over the years. I wasn't asking for jobs. I was asking for conversations, for advice, for introductions to anyone who might need marketing help. One of those conversations was with my cousin's husband, Marco, who owned a small chain of family restaurants in the Chicago suburbs. He mentioned they were struggling to attract younger customers, that their clientele was aging and they needed to modernize their brand without alienating loyal customers. I offered to help, so quoted him a rate that was a fraction of what an agency would charge, but was still money I desperately needed. Marco agreed to a small pilot project, basically a paid trial to see if I could deliver value. I developed a social media strategy, created content that highlighted the family history and authentic recipes while making it feel contemporary and appealing to millennials. I worked with his staff to implement it, trained them on maintaining the accounts, measured the results. Over 3 months, foot traffic from customers under 40 increased by 32%. Marco was thrilled. He paid me, gave me a glowing testimonial, and introduced me to other small business owners in his network. I started getting more clients, all small businesses that couldn't afford agency rates, but desperately needed professional marketing help. Restaurants, retail shops, local service businesses. The projects were smaller than what I'd handled at Pinnacle, but they were real and they were mine. I worked insane hours, often managing 6 or 7 clients simultaneously from my apartment. I did everything myself: strategy, execution, reporting, client management. It was exhausting but also energizing in a way my work at Pinnacle had never been. These clients valued me, trusted me, saw the direct impact of my work on their businesses. About 5 months into building my consultancy, I landed a client that changed everything. A regional healthcare network called Midwest Medical Group was looking for marketing support for their urgent care centers. They'd worked with a large agency that had delivered generic, expensive campaigns that didn't move the needle. They were frustrated and looking for a different approach. I pitched them on a localized, community-focused strategy that would position their urgent care centers as accessible healthcare partners rather than just medical facilities. I proposed working on a project basis initially so they could evaluate results before committing to a larger contract. They agreed. The campaign I developed for Midwest Medical was sophisticated, multi-channel work that demonstrated everything I was capable of. I used data analysis to identify underserved neighborhoods, created targeted messaging that addressed specific community health concerns, partnered with local organizations to build trust. The results were remarkable. Patient volume increased by 41% in the first 6 months, and with particularly strong growth in previously underperforming locations. Midwest Medical's CMO was so impressed she introduced me to contacts at other healthcare organizations. Healthcare became a niche I specialized in, working with hospitals, medical practices, healthcare technology companies. These were clients Pinnacle didn't serve, industries where my non-compete didn't apply. Within a year of being fired from Pinnacle, I had built a consultancy generating more income than I'd made as a senior account executive. I hired my first employee, a talented junior marketer who'd been laid off during agency cutbacks. 6 months later, I hired 2 more people. We moved out of my apartment into actual office space. I called my company Meridian Strategy Group. We stayed intentionally small and focused, never growing beyond 8 people. But we were selective about clients, specialized in healthcare and mission-driven organizations, and delivered exceptional results. Our client retention rate was 97% because we treated every relationship like a partnership rather than just a revenue source. About 18 months after being fired, I ran into Jason at an industry conference. He seemed surprised and uncomfortable to see me. Asked what I was doing these days, expecting, I think, to hear that I'd left marketing or was struggling. I told him about Meridian, kept it brief and professional. He seemed unsettled, like my success didn't fit the narrative he'd constructed about me being incompetent and washed up. A few months later, I heard through industry contacts that Pinnacle was struggling. They'd lost several major clients, had gone through multiple rounds of layoffs. Amanda had been let go during the restructuring. Jason had left for another agency. Ryan was still there, but reportedly in a diminished role. Then I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't know, a woman named Stephanie Chen. She identified herself as Amanda's younger sister and said she had information I'd want to hear. We met for coffee, and Stephanie told me a story that confirmed what I'd suspected. Amanda had been furious when she learned Patricia was considering me for a senior leadership role that Amanda wanted. She'd recruited Jason and Ryan to help undermine me, playing on Ryan's resentment about my success and Jason's ambition. They'd coordinated the sabotage of my Vital Core pitch. Ryan had used our conversation to learn details of my strategy, and then had accessed my computer after hours, using a key card he'd borrowed from facilities, claiming he'd left something in the office. He'd deleted my files and spread the initial rumors about my competence. Stephanie said Amanda had confessed all this during a drunken breakdown after being fired from Pinnacle. Stephanie was telling me because she felt guilty that her sister had done something so terrible and wanted me to know the truth, even though it couldn't undo the damage. I thanked Stephanie for telling me. It was validating to have my suspicions confirmed, to know I hadn't been paranoid or imagining the sabotage. But honestly, by that point, I didn't need the validation. I'd already proven to myself and to my clients what I was capable of. Now, the truth about what Amanda and Ryan had done mattered less than what I'd built in spite of them. About 2 years after being fired, I got a call from Lauren Diaz, my former Vital Core contact. She'd left Vital Core and was now CMO at a national wellness brand. She'd heard about Meridian through mutual connections and was impressed by our healthcare work. She wanted to talk about a potential partnership. I met with Lauren and she was direct with me. She said she'd later learned there were internal politics at Pinnacle that had affected my Vital Core pitch, that she'd always respected my strategic thinking and regretted how that relationship had ended. She wanted to give me an opportunity to pitch her new company. We won that account. It was the largest contract Meridian had ever signed, worth over $800,000 annually. Landing it put us on the map in a new way, gave us credibility that opened doors to even bigger opportunities. 3 years after being fired from Pinnacle, Meridian was generating over $4 million in annual revenue. We'd been featured in marketing publications as an example of a successful boutique consultancy. I'd been invited to speak at industry conferences. I had equity in a thriving business, autonomy over my work, and a team I'd built based on talent and integrity rather than politics. Then Patricia reached out. She sent me an email saying she'd been following Meridian's success, was impressed by what I'd built. She wanted to grab coffee and catch up. I was curious enough to agree. We met at a cafe downtown, and Patricia was complimentary in a way that felt slightly desperate. She talked about how Pinnacle had struggled after I left, how they'd realized in hindsight that they'd lost several key people who'd been crucial to their success. She asked about Meridian's growth, our client work, our approach. Then she made her pitch. She wanted to acquire Meridian, fold my consultancy into Pinnacle, bring me back as a partner with equity, reunite what she framed as complementary strengths. She floated numbers that were significant, talked about how much stronger we'd be together. I let her finish, then I very calmly explained that I had no interest in selling Meridian or rejoining Pinnacle in any capacity, that I'd built something I was proud of with people I trusted, and I wasn't interested in giving that up to return to an organization that had treated me so poorly. Patricia looked uncomfortable. She said she understood I'd had a difficult departure, but that business was business, that sometimes tough personnel decisions had to be made. I stopped her. I told her I knew about the sabotage, about Amanda and Ryan's coordinated effort to undermine me. I said I wasn't angry about it anymore, but I also wasn't interested in pretending it hadn't happened or that Pinnacle was a place that rewarded merit over politics. Patricia tried to defend herself, said she hadn't known about the sabotage, that if she'd understood what was really happening, she would have handled things differently. Maybe that was true, maybe it wasn't. It didn't really matter. I told her I appreciated the offer, but that Meridian would remain independent. I wished her well with Pinnacle and left. 6 months after that conversation, Pinnacle was acquired by a larger holding company. The acquisition was framed as a growth opportunity, but everyone in the industry knew it was a rescue. Patricia retained a small equity stake but lost operational control. Most of the remaining original staff were let go during the integration. I felt no satisfaction in Pinnacle's struggles, just a quiet recognition that organizations built on politics and short-term thinking tend to be fragile. When your competitive advantage comes from talented people and you drive those people away through dysfunction, you hollow out your own foundation. Meridian kept growing steadily. We maintained our focus on healthcare and mission-driven organizations. We stayed small by choice, turning down opportunities that would require compromising our culture or quality. I promoted people based on their contributions and integrity. We built the kind of workplace I'd wanted Pinnacle to be. I occasionally think about Amanda and Ryan and what they gained by sabotaging me. Amanda got fired a year later when Pinnacle downsized. Ryan avoided layoffs, but never advanced to the leadership role he'd wanted, spending years in the same position until the acquisition made his role redundant. They destroyed my career at Pinnacle to eliminate competition for advancement that never materialized for them anyway. The irony is that by forcing me out of Pinnacle, they'd actually done me a favor. I'd been comfortable there, successful within someone else's system. I probably would have stayed for years, climbing the ladder, accepting whatever limitations came, with working for Patricia and dealing with office politics. And being fired had forced me to take a risk I never would have taken otherwise. It had freed me to build something aligned with my values. That's the lesson I learned from the worst professional experience of my life. Sometimes betrayal is redirection. Sometimes the people trying to destroy you are actually pushing you towards something better that you were too afraid or too comfortable to pursue on your own. I'm not grateful for what Amanda and Ryan did. Sabotage is never justified, and the months after being fired were genuinely traumatic. But I'm grateful for what I built in response to it. I'm grateful I learned that my worth wasn't determined by whether any particular employer valued me. I'm grateful I discovered I was capable of creating something from nothing when I had no other choice. The best revenge wasn't confronting my saboteurs or publicly exposing them or watching Pinnacle struggle. The best revenge was building something successful enough that their opinions became irrelevant. They'd tried to end my career. Instead, they'd ended my willingness to let other people define my potential. I run into former Pinnacle colleagues occasionally at industry events. Some apologize for not defending me, for believing the rumors, for participating in the toxic culture that pushed me out. I appreciate the apologies, but don't need them. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just focused on different things. My company, my team, my clients, they're what matter now. Building something sustainable and meaningful, treating people with integrity, doing work I'm proud of, in creating opportunities for talented people who might otherwise get lost in dysfunctional corporate systems. That's the real victory. Not that my saboteurs failed, but that I succeeded in ways they can't touch or diminish. They took away a job. I built a career. They damaged my reputation in one agency. I built a reputation in an industry. They tried to make me small. I grew beyond their reach. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the vital core pitch had succeeded, if Amanda and Ryan had never sabotaged me, if I'd stayed at Pinnacle and climbed the ladder there. I'd probably be a VP now, making good money, managing a team, comfortable but constrained, building someone else's vision instead of my own. I wouldn't trade what I have now for that alternative timeline. The pain of being betrayed and fired was real. Yeah, but what I built from that pain is more valuable than what I lost. I own my success now. I control my destiny. I work with people I respect and clients who value me. That's worth more than any corporate title. The people who tried to ruin me thought they were eliminating competition. They were actually teaching me that I didn't need their approval or their institution to succeed. They thought they were ending my career. They were actually beginning it. I survived their sabotage. Then I thrived in spite of it. Not because I'm extraordinary, but because I refused to let their assessment of my worth become my assessment of my worth. Because I was willing to rebuild when everything fell apart. Because I learned that sometimes the only way out is through. That's the lesson for anyone who's been betrayed or sabotaged or pushed out unfairly. Your former colleagues, your old company, the people who hurt you, they don't get to write the final chapter of your story. You do. They can create obstacles and spread lies and make your life difficult. But they can't stop you from building something new unless you let them. The best revenge is refusing to stay defeated. It's learning from the betrayal without becoming bitter. It's building something so aligned with your values that the opinions of people who don't share those values become background noise. 5 years after being fired, I'm running a company I'm proud of, working with people I trust, doing meaningful work that makes a difference. My former saboteurs are footnotes in my story now, not main characters. They tried to end me. Instead, they freed me. I survived. I thrived. And that's the only revenge that really matters. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.